At the airport, a woman shoved her baby into my arms and said, "Please hold her until I come back." I was sitting at gate 22 of Logan Airport, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, half paying attention to the boarding announcements while thinking about how late I was for my own flight. My bag was at my feet, my coffee slightly lukewarm, and I was feeling that familiar mix of travel fatigue and boredom that always seems to hit before a long flight. Honestly, I wasn't even looking at the crowd around me, just a little glowing screen in my hands, and then she came. At first I didn't notice her. 1 second, I was watching some ridiculous TikTok compilation of people failing at cooking, and the next I felt a sharp nudge against my chest. I looked up, and that's when it happened. This woman, early 30s, panicked eyes, like she'd just run a marathon while the world was on fire, shoved something into my arms. Something tiny. Something that instantly made me freeze because it was squirming, wriggling, alive, and warm. A baby. A real, crying, screaming baby staring up at me with huge eyes, probably thinking I was some kind of giant monster in a black hoodie. "Please, please hold her until I come back," the woman yelled, her words a jumble of desperation and panic. I swear, my brain stopped working for a full 3 seconds. 3 seconds might not sound like a lot, but in those 3 seconds, everything I thought I knew about my life changed. Here I was, a 29-year-old man who could barely keep a cactus alive, suddenly holding a tiny human being who was completely dependent on me. And the woman was already bolting away like she had somewhere more important to be, like she wasn't leaving me stranded with the loudest, messiest responsibility I'd ever held. I just stood there. The baby's cries pierced through the background noise of the airport. The rolling suitcases, the chatter of travelers, the intercom announcements. It was relentless, like a tiny fire alarm designed specifically to make sure you couldn't think straight. I looked around, hoping someone, anyone, would step in, but people just glanced at me awkwardly, muttered something to their companions, and moved on. Ma'am," I called after her, my voice cracking in a way that made me sound about 12. Are you coming back?" No response. She was gone. Vanished? Poof. I felt a wave of panic. What the hell was I supposed to do now? I had no clue how to hold a baby properly. Do you cradle them like a football, like I'd seen in movies? Or upright? I didn't even know what to do if she pooped or cried or, God forbid, threw up on me. And yet, here I was, clutching this tiny, wailing creature as though my life depended on it. And in a sense, I realized it did. "Okay," I muttered to myself, speaking in a tone that suggested maybe I could convince myself I wasn't going to completely ruin everything. "Okay, you just breathe, you've got this." Yeah, I really sounded like a motivational poster at that moment, didn't I? I tried to calm her down, gently patting her back. My hands were shaking. She wriggled in my arms like a little jellyfish with lungs, and I swear the crying escalated tenfold with every attempt I made to soothe her. People were starting to stare now. Some were filming. I could feel their judgment like a physical weight pressing into my shoulders. "Look at this idiot," they probably thought. "Can't even handle a baby for 5 seconds. I glanced around for airport staff. Surely they had a lost child protocol, right? Some baby helping unit? I jogged up to a security guard, waving my hands like a maniac. Excuse me. Someone left a baby," I stammered. The guard raised an eyebrow. "A baby?" "Yes, a baby. Someone literally," I gestured vaguely toward where the woman had disappeared, "ran off with their baby and left it with me." He squinted, looking from me to the baby. The baby looked back at him, apparently unimpressed by the concept of airport authority. "Sir, where's the mother?" he asked slowly. I don't know," I said, feeling my voice climb another octave. "She just ran. She said to hold her until she came back." The guard shook his head. "All right, step over here. We'll figure this out." I followed him, cradling the baby like she was a ticking bomb. Every tiny coo or gurgle sent my heart racing. I noticed a slight smell, diaper-related, probably, and panicked internally. Do I ask her if she needs changing? Do I even know what to do with this? We got to the security office. A couple more staffers were there, their eyes wide. "She just left him. Or her. She just left the baby," I repeated, gesturing helplessly. One of the staffers took a step closer. "Ma'am, this is a serious accusation. Are you sure it wasn't—" I stopped her. "No, I mean yes. I mean, look at her." I pointed to the baby. She looked at me like she was already judging me for being utterly unprepared. "She's real. She's right here." I felt the weight of everyone staring at me. I realized something important right then. This wasn't just a weird airport mishap. This was serious. Somebody, this woman, trusted me with her baby, and she didn't even hesitate. That little moment of trust, the way she looked at me, flash panic in her eyes, her lips trembling as she ran, it hit me. I had no choice. I mean, technically, I could have run too, called the cops, shoved the baby onto a nearby couple, but that would have been horrible. And weirdly, for some reason, I didn't want to be horrible. "All right," I said, exhaling shakily. "Okay, I'll take care of her." The staff looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You're what?" I said. "I'll take care of her, just until we figure this out," I said. I felt the words hit my chest like bricks, but I said them anyway. Because even though my brain was screaming, "Run! Panic! You can't do this!" there was something in me, a little voice I didn't know I had, that said, "You can handle this. You have to." And honestly, That's how it started. The baby, by now, was staring at me with big, wet eyes. She had this tiny little tuft of hair that stuck up at the back, like she had her own personal crown. And I swear she tilted her head at me like she was already judging my life choices. And I realized she didn't know me. She didn't know anyone. But she was now my responsibility. And in that weird, immediate way that life sometimes does, I felt a surge of care, of protectiveness, of sheer terror. But also, something else. Something like purpose. It's strange, holding a baby when your entire adult life has been about deadlines, work emails, and mundane little routines. Suddenly, the world narrows down to this tiny human being in your arms. Every little squeak, every hiccup, every breath feels monumental. And I swear, in that moment, I understood why parents freak out all the time. Because every little sound mattered. Every little expression mattered. And right now, she mattered. And nobody else did. So yeah, that was my morning. Sitting in an airport, holding a screaming, poop-prone, probably hungry baby, and realizing that my entire life had just shifted. I had no idea what the woman had gotten herself into, why she left her baby with a stranger, or how long she would be gone. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her down. Not today. Not ever. After the initial chaos in the airport security office, I thought I could finally take a breath. But nope, not even close. Holding a baby in an airport is like juggling live grenades while blindfolded. Every little noise, movement, or distraction feels like it could set off disaster. I had a stroller. I didn't actually, but if I did, I would have had no idea how to use it. So I just held her, cradling her close, trying to soothe the rapid-fire cries that still pierced through my brain. The airport staff kept glancing at me like I was auditioning for some kind of weird parenting reality show. Meanwhile, my own thoughts were racing a mile a minute. Who is she? Where did she come from? Why did that woman just hand her over like I was some random superhero on call? I decided the logical first step was to figure out if anyone knew the baby. Maybe she had a lost child announcement somewhere, or maybe the staff had some record. "Excuse me," I said to the nearest airline employee, my voice wobbling as I adjusted the baby in my arms. "Has anyone reported a missing child? Baby?" The woman behind the counter blinked at me, then typed something into her computer. "No, sir. There's been no report. Are you sure you didn't misunderstand?" I stared at her like she had just asked me if the moon was made of cheese. No, I didn't misunderstand. Someone handed me this baby and ran away. I felt my own heartbeat spike. The baby squirmed in my arms, wailing now like a tiny banshee. They called security again, who checked every terminal, every boarding area, every lost and found counter. No one knew her. No announcements had been made. I started to feel that cold prickle at the back of my neck, the one that tells you things are definitely not normal. I remembered the woman's face, her eyes, full-on panic like someone was hunting her, and her lips trembling when she said, "Please, hold her until I come back." There was urgency and maybe even fear, and that fear was starting to make its way into me. I was holding a baby whose mother, or maybe caretaker, was scared enough to run from something. At that moment, I realized this wasn't just an abandoned baby scenario. This was something more, something dangerous. I took a deep breath and tried to calm the baby again. She was warm against my chest, tiny little fingers curling around mine, her breathing uneven. Somehow, I found a rhythm, gently bouncing her, whispering nonsense words, even humming a tune I barely knew the words to. It worked, kind of. The wails lessened to whimpers. The baby blinked up at me like I was some kind of strange, giant creature, but at least she wasn't screaming at the top of her lungs anymore. I gave her a nickname, Peanut, because obviously she was small and somehow felt like the most important thing in the world at that exact second. The next hour, or maybe two, time started blending, was a masterclass in improvisation. I tried feeding her with a bottle I borrowed from the lounge cafe, half hoping she'd drink something other than air. She did. Somehow, she did. Then came the diaper crisis. I won't get into the messy details, but let's just say I discovered I had the wrong instincts entirely, and I didn't know the difference between a wet diaper and a dirty one until the smell hit me. Survival, I realized, meant improvising fast. While I was learning all these new skills in real time, my peripheral vision kept catching movement. Men, strangers, not the usual travelers, but men in suits with sharp eyes, subtle but attentive. They weren't walking aimlessly, they were scanning the crowd. And more importantly, they kept glancing in my direction. Every time I looked up, one would shift slightly, make a quick movement like he was checking a watch, then look away. My chest tightened. Why are they watching me? What do they want? I told myself to calm down. It was probably paranoia. Maybe they were just normal business travelers, but deep down, I knew it wasn't paranoia. The way those eyes lingered, the way they moved, it was predatory, focused, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. I tried to ignore them while keeping Peanut calm. I started bouncing her in a circle, whispering little stories about nothing in particular, making faces at her, telling her about my life, which, up until now, mostly consisted of coffee, bad office jokes, and forgetting birthdays. Surprisingly, she seemed to like it. She giggled once, tiny, adorable, and terrifyingly overwhelming. That laugh hit me straight in the chest. It was like a tiny beacon saying, "I trust you, for now." Then came the second wave of panic. Airport announcements. Flights were boarding. People were rushing. The PA system repeated security alerts and gate changes. I had to navigate all of this while holding a small human being who had zero concept of patience. I realized just how much I had underestimated my own capability, or lack thereof. Somewhere in the back of my mind, flashes of the woman's face came back. Her hair stuck to her forehead with sweat, her eyes wide, darting around. The way she moved, frantically, like she was running not just to catch a flight, but from something else. And her hands, her voice, those last words, trembling with fear. Please hold her until I come back, echoed in my mind like some warning I couldn't yet understand. I thought about calling the police myself, but what if they took Peanuts away before I even figured out what was happening? What if they asked questions I couldn't answer? And more importantly, what if the people watching me weren't just random men in suits? What if they were the reason this woman ran? That's when the reality hit me. This wasn't a simple lost child scenario. This was bigger. Much bigger. I was standing in the middle of a crowded airport, holding a baby, and the stakes were climbing faster than I could even measure. The men in suits were still there, subtly shifting closer. I felt my stomach knotting. I tried to act casual, feeding Peanut, bouncing her gently, pretending I wasn't aware of the eyes on me. But they weren't subtle enough. My heart was thundering. My hands were shaking, and yet I couldn't put her down. In that moment, I realized that Peanut had become my responsibility, not just emotionally, but physically, strategically. Whoever was watching, whatever danger was out there, I was now part of it. And somehow, despite the panic, despite the fear, despite the complete absurdity of the situation, I started to feel ready to do whatever it took to keep her safe, because she was counting on me. And somehow, in the midst of all the chaos, the screaming, the running airport staff, the suspicious men, the constant noise, I felt a strange sense of connection, like this tiny human being who didn't even know me had already changed my life. I had no idea who she was, no idea why she was left in my arms, and definitely no clue what was about to happen next. But one thing was certain. This was no ordinary airport mishap. This was a beginning. And somehow, in that moment, I knew I was about to be dragged into a world I didn't even know existed. A world that, whether I liked it or not, Peanut had just enrolled me into. Boarding a plane while holding a baby is, apparently, a life skill I did not acquire in the first 29 years of my existence. But there I was, clutching Peanut like she was a bomb with a timer, trying to maneuver past passengers, carry-on luggage, and airline staff with that polite smile that screams, I have no idea what I'm doing. The looks people gave me ranged from pity to annoyance to outright judgment. One woman even whispered something to her husband, clearly audible, like I could somehow not hear it. Why is that man holding a baby by himself? That's weird. I muttered a shaky, I know, I got this, under my breath. Because what else do you do when a perfect stranger hands you a tiny human and disappears? Settling into my seat, I realized that the airplane was not only smaller than I remembered, but also quieter than the terminal, a small bubble of forced calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the past few hours. Peanut was still in my arms, staring at me with wide eyes, occasionally letting out soft little whimpers. I gently bounced her against my chest, humming the same nonsense tune I'd improvised at the airport. Okay, I thought, time to think. You can't just sit here panicking, you need a plan. First, I had to understand the danger. I remembered the men in suits from the airport, the way their eyes lingered a little too long. Whoever that woman was running from, she clearly wasn't just late for a flight. She was running from something dangerous, and now I was responsible for her child. I pulled out my phone, trying to think like someone who wasn't completely panicked. Maybe I could track the woman, maybe find a police report. My fingers hesitated over the screen as Peanut squirmed slightly, testing her tiny legs against my chest. And then my phone buzzed. I jumped, not literally, but it felt that way, and nearly dropped Peanut. I fumbled, got my grip steady, and saw the notification, an unknown number, a single message. Do not trust anyone, they're coming for her. I stared at the screen, blinked, stared again. My palms went sweaty. My mind raced. Who sends a text like this? Who knew I would be on this flight? And more importantly, who were they? The baby let out a small whimper, as if she understood the panic radiating from me. I cradled her closer. Okay, Peanut, I whispered. We're going to figure this out. Flashbacks of the woman's face appeared in my mind. Her hair stuck to her forehead, damp with sweat. Her eyes wide and frantic. Her voice trembling as she said, Please hold her until I come back. I remembered the desperation in her posture, the fear that had radiated from her like heat from a fire. She hadn't been running because she was late for a flight. She'd been running because she was scared. And now, somehow, that fear had transferred to me. I realized in that moment something I hadn't admitted yet. This was bigger than me. Much bigger. Criminal networks, conspiracies, maybe even human trafficking, or something else entirely. Peanut wasn't just a baby left behind. She was a key. Something important. Something someone dangerous wanted. I felt the weight of responsibility crush me. This wasn't just holding a baby while her mother ran errands. This was holding a baby who could very well be in serious danger if the wrong person got their hands on her. And the wrong people were out there, watching, waiting, tracking us. I tried to calm my thoughts to focus on the immediate problem, keeping Peanut safe on this flight. I adjusted her position, making sure her head was supported, her blanket tucked securely around her. I whispered nonsense stories about the airport, about airplanes, about a ridiculous talking squirrel named Gerald, who apparently saved the world once by stealing a car. She cooed softly, and I allowed myself a brief moment of relief. Then I noticed the man sitting across the aisle. I hadn't paid attention before, but now his presence fell off. Sharp suit, slicked back hair, eyes constantly scanning, not looking at the flight attendants or his laptop, looking at me. My chest tightened. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew better. I needed a plan. I couldn't just sit here clinging to Peanut like a frightened raccoon. I had to figure out a way to get off the plane safely, to protect her, and maybe, just maybe, find out who that woman was and why she had left her child with me. But first, I had to survive the flight. And by survive, I meant two things. 1, keep Peanut from screaming at the top of her lungs. 2, avoid attracting any more attention from whoever might be watching. I started plotting in my head. Once we landed, I could slip out, avoid the usual baggage claim chaos. I could find a taxi or a car service. I could get somewhere private to figure things out. But even as I planned, the flight attendants moved down the aisle, offering drinks and snacks. Passengers adjusted, stared, whispered. And Peanut tested my patience and my grip simultaneously, kicking her legs, waving her tiny arms, letting out a squeal that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Or was it terror? I couldn't tell. Hours felt like days. Every bump of the plane, every announcement over the intercom, every shuffle of feet made my heart race. I whispered encouragement to Peanut, made up new characters for our ridiculous little imaginary story, counted ceiling tiles, and made mental lists of everyone who could be the bad guy waiting for us on the other end. By the time the captain announced our descent, I felt like I had aged a decade. Landing brought no relief. My hands were stiff from holding Peanut, my nerves frayed from constant vigilance. And yet, as we taxied to the gate, I realized something crucial. This wasn't just a temporary crisis. Whoever that woman was, whatever she was running from, I was now part of it, and there was no turning back. I looked down at Peanut. She yawned, stretched her tiny arms, and blinked up at me. For a moment, the world shrank again to just her and me, and I realized something else. I was ready to protect her, not just for the next hour, not just for the flight, but for as long as it took. The plane touched down, wheels screeching softly against the tarmac. I adjusted my grip, inhaled deeply, and whispered to Peanut, "Here we go. Step 2. Stay calm. We've got this. Together." The unknown awaited us outside that airplane door. Unknown danger, unknown people, unknown truths. But I didn't care. I had Peanut, and for now, that was enough. Because whatever was coming next, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just an abandoned baby story. This was the start of something much bigger, something dangerous. And I was right in the middle of it. Once the plane landed and we had slipped into the anonymity of the city streets, I thought, naively, that things might calm down. That maybe, just maybe, the constant anxiety of the past few hours could ease. Wrong. That's not how life works when a stranger shoves a baby into your arms and disappears like a ghost. First order of business. Figure out who Peanut really was. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just a baby left behind by a frazzled mom. No. This was a baby connected to something much bigger, and I had no clue what that was. I started with the obvious, hospitals. If this child had been in anyone's care recently, surely someone would have a record. I went from one hospital to another, presenting myself like a worried relative, explaining vaguely that a baby had been left in my custody, hoping someone could tell me, "Oh yes, she's fine, she was just here for vaccinations last week." Nope, nothing, nada, zilch. Daycare centers were no better. I called, I walked in, I asked, I pleaded, nothing. Nobody had ever seen Peanut before. And as each door closed, each receptionist shook her head at me. I felt the weight of realization settle like a stone in my chest. She wasn't just lost. She wasn't in the system. She was off the grid. I should have panicked. I did. For about 20 minutes, but then I reminded myself that panic solves nothing. You act, you plan, you survive. So I did the only thing that made sense at the moment. I kept her close, kept asking questions, and stayed alert. Every time I felt a shadow at the corner of my eye, every time a stranger lingered a little too long, my nerves went taut. And then came the journalist. I was sitting on a bench outside a hospital, exhausted, bouncing Peanut gently in my arms while she dozed lightly against my chest. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I ignored it. For now. A man approached me cautiously, holding a notepad and a coffee cup like he had been waiting for someone. He gave me a polite smile. "Mind if I sit?" I looked around, confused. Sure." He sat, carefully folding his legs, his eyes flicking to the baby in my arms. "That's quite a charge you're carrying there," he said, nodding toward Peanut. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Yeah, I muttered. "She kind of fell into my lap." He chuckled softly. "That's one way to put it. You're Ethan, right?" I blinked. Yeah. How do you know my name?" He smiled faintly. "Let's just say I have sources. And let's also say that kid you're holding is more trouble than you think." I tensed. "What do you mean?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. There's a network, something big, corporate espionage, trafficking, dangerous people. You're holding a child that some very powerful people would do anything to get back. Or silence. I froze. The word sank in, heavy as iron. Corporate espionage, dangerous people, silencing a baby. I couldn't even begin to wrap my head around it. Wait, what? That doesn't make any sense. Why would they? How would she even? He shook his head. I don't know all the details. I only know enough to tell you, you can't trust anyone. Not the cops, not strangers, not even people who seem helpful. If you want to keep that baby safe, you have to do it yourself. For now. My stomach churned. Every instinct screamed at me. Every hair on my body stood on end. Do it yourself. No one can be trusted. And that's when I realized just how alone I really was. Leaving the hospital, I felt eyes on me again. Always eyes. A man in a long coat who had appeared in the corner of my vision at the hospital entrance. Another figure across the street, pretending to check his phone but constantly glancing in my direction. I could feel them tracking me, studying me, calculating. Every step I took, every turn I made, they were there. Just far enough away to avoid suspicion. I had to be smart. I started varying my routes, taking back alleys, walking through crowds, ducking into cafes. Peanut slept lightly against my chest, blissfully unaware of the danger surrounding her, and I felt a protective rage simmer beneath the surface. Whoever had left her with me must have known I was the only chance she had, and I wasn't going to fail her. Multiple times, I narrowly avoided confrontations. A man bumped into me too hard, murmured something under his breath, and vanished into a crowd. Another car slowed suspiciously as I crossed the street, lingering before disappearing. Every encounter ratcheted my anxiety higher. I realized I had to assume everyone could be a threat, and I had to move accordingly. At this point, I began to trust no one. Every polite smile, every casual question, every glance felt like a potential trap. The city itself seemed to warp into a web of shadows and whispers. A maze where one wrong turn could mean disaster. But through it all, Peanut was my anchor. I learned how to calm her faster, how to anticipate her needs, how to carry her without drawing attention. Her soft breathing, her small hands curling around my fingers, gave me strength I didn't know I had, and as I watched her sleep in my arms, I made a decision. I couldn't go back to anyone. Not the authorities, not the airport, not anyone claiming they could help. If I handed her over without understanding the full picture, I would be condemning her, or at least leaving her vulnerable. No, I had to go on the run. Temporarily, yes. But I had to ensure her safety myself until I knew the truth. It was the first real adult decision I'd ever made that carried life or death consequences. And despite the fear, I felt a strange, empowering clarity. The responsibility was mine. Every choice, every move, every careful decision now rested on my shoulders. So I started planning. I would find a safe place to hide, a way to gather information, a method to stay ahead of whoever was tracking us. Every detail mattered. Every second counted. Peanut stirred in my arms and yawned, and I smiled faintly, despite the tension that had my chest tight. She didn't know it yet, but we were in this together. And whatever lay ahead, I was determined that she would survive, because I had no choice. And somehow, for the first time in my life, I felt fully responsible for something truly important. The city stretched ahead of us like a labyrinth, and I, clutching a baby I barely knew but would do anything to protect, was ready to navigate every shadow, every threat, every lie to keep her safe. This was no longer just about a lost child. This was about survival, and the web of lies we were stepping into had only just begun to tighten. By now, Peanut had started to feel less like a random screaming burden and more like a tiny living person with her own personality, quirks, and moods. I gave her a proper nickname, Peanut, and it stuck. Somehow, it fit. She had this little tuft of hair that stood straight up, like a defiant little flag, and every time she made that soft gurgling sound, I swore she was mocking me for being so utterly unprepared. I learned the patterns of her day, or at least as much as I could. She hated being cold, absolutely refused to drink from any bottle that wasn't at a precise temperature, and had a laugh that could make the worst day feel tolerable. It was a small comfort, this routine of learning her quirks in the middle of the chaos of the unknown world we were navigating. But trust? Trust had become a rare commodity. Everywhere we went, I had to assume someone could be watching, that anyone who smiled at me might have a hidden agenda, and yet I had to reach out. I had to gather information. I had to survive. It started with strangers offering help. Some were innocuous, a barista handing me a coffee without charge, noticing the tired, frazzled look in my eyes. Some were more deliberate, like a woman at a bookstore suggesting a safe place to rest, or a man in a parking garage offering a car for transport. On the surface, they seemed helpful, almost kind, but my gut told me otherwise. My gut was screaming, don't trust them, and it was right. The first real betrayal came when a man approached me under the guise of being an investigative journalist. He smiled, asked about Peanut, and offered information about her mother. He claimed to know details about a criminal network, things that matched the journalist I had met earlier, but somehow more specific. He said he could help us. He said he could get us safe transport out of the city. I almost believed him, almost. But when I followed him to a nondescript alleyway to discuss logistics, he tried to grab Peanut. I reacted on instinct, shoving him back and bolting with her pressed against my chest. My heart was hammering, adrenaline rushing, and Peanut, sensing the tension, let out a shrill cry that echoed off the alley walls. After that, trust became even harder to find. Every friendly face was scrutinized, every suggestion questioned, every act of kindness measured against potential ulterior motives. I realized that whoever had left Peanut with me was trying to protect her from something or someone dangerous. And that danger wasn't just anyone. It was specific, calculated, and ruthless. I started digging into the woman's life the way I would dig through a crime scene. Public records, social media, online databases. I tried everything I could to find her identity, her background, anything that might explain why she'd chosen me of all people to leave Peanut with. I found fragments, scattered like breadcrumbs. A few social media posts hinted at a professional career, but she was careful, meticulous, leaving almost no trace. And then there were the gaps, the unexplained disappearances, the accounts of men and women in her life who seemed to vanish as quickly as she did. There were whispers online, rumors about dangerous associations, threats, maybe even organized crime. Nothing concrete, nothing I could prove, but enough to make me realize that the woman had a dark past she hadn't shared, and that past was closing in. Every clue I uncovered only tightened the noose around our temporary sanctuary. The men in suits, the cars that slowed suspiciously as I walked by, the people who seemed to appear wherever I went. They weren't random. They were following a pattern. They were looking for Peanut and, by extension, looking for me. Through it all, I grew closer to Peanut. Her little quirks became my guideposts in the madness. She laughed at my bad jokes, gurgled in response to nonsense stories, and rested her tiny head against my shoulder as if she knew, somehow, that I was the one keeping her safe. She was the one constant in a world full of uncertainty and betrayal. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized that time was running out. Every step I took was being monitored. Every move we made was anticipated. The woman's enemies weren't just closing in, they were relentless. They had resources, intelligence, and patience, and I had Peanut, and nothing else. I didn't know who to trust, or even if I could trust anyone at all, but one thing was clear. I couldn't hand her over to anyone. Not the authorities, not strangers, not even those who claimed to help. The responsibility was mine, entirely mine, and for the first time, I understood what that truly meant. It meant sleepless nights, constant vigilance, and the understanding that our lives could change or end in an instant. It also meant that I had to accept a truth I wasn't ready for. Peanut's safety depended entirely on me, no one else. And if I failed, there was no one to save her. It started with a name. A single piece of information I had been chasing for what felt like an eternity finally surfaced from the chaos of online records, whispers from cautious informants, and scraps of clues I had painstakingly pieced together. Her name was AITA Mercer. And the more I learned, the heavier the truth hit me. She wasn't just a frantic mother who had panicked at an airport. She was on the run from a criminal network so ruthless, so organized, that they made organized crime look like a weekend hobby. I remember sitting on the edge of a narrow motel bed, Peanut sleeping lightly against my chest, staring at the screen of my laptop as the pieces fell into place. AITA Mercer had been a rising star in corporate intelligence, working in sectors that involved sensitive information, high-value assets, and, it seemed, dangerous enemies. Somewhere along the way, her life had collided with people who didn't just want her out of the way. They wanted her silenced. And that's why she had left Peanut with me. I could see it now. Her frantic eyes, her trembling hands, her whispered plea, "Please hold her until I come back." This wasn't desperation born of inconvenience. It was desperation born of fear. Fear that if she didn't act, her baby would be taken, used, or harmed in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Flashbacks started invading my mind like a relentless storm. Isla, hurriedly packing a small bag, glancing over her shoulder, her voice cracking as she spoke to me before vanishing into the crowd. Messages I had intercepted, or that had appeared on my phone from unknown numbers, now made horrifying sense. Threats, warnings, notes about making her disappear, and no witnesses. I wasn't just holding a baby. I was holding a living symbol of someone else's life, someone else's desperate fight against annihilation. I ran through the timeline, the pieces of Isla's life forming a jagged, terrifying mosaic. Betrayal from trusted colleagues. Threats that escalated from veiled warnings to outright attacks. People in positions of power, expecting obedience and punishing defiance. Isla had tried to play smart, to outmaneuver them, to stay ahead, but she had known the game was too dangerous for a newborn to be involved. And so she made a choice that now fell squarely on my shoulders. I looked down at Peanut. She stirred in her sleep, tiny hands curling around my fingers, completely unaware of the storm surrounding her. The weight of responsibility hit me harder than anything I had ever felt. This wasn't about babysitting. This wasn't a temporary arrangement until Isla returned. I wasn't just a caretaker. I was a guardian, a shield, the first line of defense between a baby and people who would stop at nothing to capture her. The realization didn't come gently. It hit like a punch to the gut, leaving me gasping for air. Every decision I made from this point forward had consequences, not just for me, but for Peanut. One wrong step, one misplaced trust, and it could all be over in an instant. And that's when the full gravity of my role crystallized. I had to protect her. No questions, no hesitation, no trusting strangers, no shortcuts. I had to plan, strategize, anticipate every possible threat. Because Isla's enemies weren't just powerful, they were patient, they were clever, and they were relentless. I spent hours combing through information, connecting dots that I hadn't even known were there. Who had betrayed Isla? Which contacts could be trusted? What patterns emerged in the attacks and warnings she had received? Each revelation added layers of urgency. I realized that whatever was coming for Peanut would not announce itself politely. It would arrive silently, efficiently, and without warning. Preparing for the inevitable confrontation became my sole focus. I mapped out escape routes, safe houses, and contingency plans. I stocked supplies, food, water, basic medical kits, communication devices, anything that might give me a slight edge against unknown adversaries. Every time Peanut stirred or cried, I was reminded why I was doing this. Not for glory, not for recognition, not for personal gain. For her. For the tiny life entrusted to me by a woman whose existence itself had been threatened. I also prepared myself mentally. Fear was inevitable, but panic was not an option. I ran scenarios over and over in my mind. What if they tried to ambush me at a hotel? What if they tracked us through our phones? What if they used deception, posing as allies? I had to be ready for all of it. And yet, amidst the tension, there was clarity. Peanut's safety was now my mission. Her life was intertwined with mine, and every choice I made mattered. I couldn't falter. I couldn't hesitate. I couldn't allow anyone to take her from me. The night stretched long, filled with restless planning and careful observation. Every noise outside my motel room door, every passing car, every shadow crossing the window made my pulse quicken. And all the while, Peanut slept, oblivious to the danger that loomed around her. Finally, I understood the truth in its entirety. Isla had not abandoned her child. She had entrusted her to me because I was the best chance Peanut had of surviving. And now, the burden that had initially felt like chaos, confusion, and fear had transformed into something else entirely. Resolve. I would protect her. I would fight. I would run. I would outsmart anyone who threatened her, and I would do whatever it took because she depended on me, and failing was not an option. As the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, I held Peanut close, whispering gently to her and steeled myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. The storm that had claimed Isla's life, her safety and her freedom was closing in, and I had to face it head on. This wasn't just babysitting anymore. This was war. And I was her only shield. I don't even remember how I got here. One moment, I was planning, calculating, trying to stay one step ahead of shadowy figures, tracking our every move. The next, I was running through an underground parking garage, Peanut pressed to my chest, my heart hammering like a drum in my ears. Every instinct screamed, move faster. Every fiber of my being was on high alert. And yet, I had to remain calm enough to keep her safe. It was the culmination of everything I'd learned, every danger I had narrowly escaped, every misstep I had avoided. The criminal network that had been chasing Isla Mercer, and now us, was finally within reach. Not metaphorically, but literally. Their agents were nearby, converging from multiple angles, like a shadowy web closing in. I ducked behind a pillar, letting Peanut settle against my shoulder as her small fingers curled around mine. I whispered softly, trying to soothe her even as my own adrenaline spiked. Almost there, Peanut. Almost there. Daddy's got this. I had learned quickly, brute force wasn't going to win this. Every move had to be calculated, every decision precise. I used my phone sparingly, relying on memory and observation. There were cameras everywhere, eyes everywhere, listening everywhere. Any hint that we were escaping could lead them straight to us. And then came the first confrontation. Two men in tailored suits appeared from opposite ends of the hallway. They didn't yell. They didn't give me time to react. Their confidence alone said, "We know you can't outsmart us." But I had a few tricks left. I ducked behind a maintenance cart, rolling it forward just enough to create a barrier, and then sprinted down a side corridor I had scouted earlier. They followed, but not fast enough. I ducked into a stairwell, using its echoes and shadows to my advantage, counting on their overconfidence to buy me precious seconds. Peanut fussed at the sudden movement, but I kept my grip firm. She wasn't just a baby. She was Isla's life, and by extension, my own now. Every stumble, every misstep was unthinkable. Somewhere in the chaos, allies emerged. A janitor who had seen too much but decided to help, guiding me through maintenance tunnels to avoid detection. A taxi driver who understood instinctively that we were being hunted, taking us on a convoluted route that nobody could track. They appeared as if summoned by some invisible thread, small fragments of help in a world designed to overwhelm me. But trust remained a dangerous game. Even allies could have hidden agendas. One man tried to persuade me to hand Peanut over, claiming it was for her safety. I almost fell for it, almost, but instinct told me otherwise. The desperation in his eyes didn't match the logic of his words. I refused. I moved on. I couldn't risk it. And then, just when exhaustion threatened to consume me, Isla returned. She appeared without warning, as if she had materialized from the shadows themselves. Her eyes locked on me, then Peanut, and I felt the weight of every choice, every sleepless night, every narrow escape finally make sense. Together, we became a unit. My strategy, her knowledge, Peanut's presence, they formed a triad of survival. Isla guided me through the final stretch, providing information I couldn't have known on my own. The layout of the building where the network's operations were centralized, the timing of their movements, the weak points in their security. It was a coordinated effort that required trust, intuition, and nerves of steel. The confrontation came quickly. Men who had seemed invincible, relentless, suddenly found themselves outmaneuvered, misled, and disoriented. Isla and I used their confidence against them, exploiting gaps, using misdirection, and staying one step ahead. Every shadow became a shield, every echo a warning, and all the while, Peanut remained safe in my arms, a fragile center of gravity in a storm of chaos. Betrayals complicated matters further. A contact I had trusted turned out to be an informant, feeding our movements to the enemy. That revelation came in the form of footsteps echoing too closely behind us, a whispered command in a voice I recognized too late. I reacted instinctively, turning, blocking, and ducking, managing to escape thanks to Isla's timely intervention. It was a harsh reminder that even in the final stretch, vigilance was everything. Hours, or maybe minutes, time blurred, I can't be sure. Later, the network's threat was neutralized. I don't know exactly how it all unfolded because the adrenaline, the fear, and the constant awareness of Peanut's presence condensed everything into a series of instinctual moves. But I remember the final moment clearly. Silence. Real silence. No pursuit, no shadows. Just Ela, Peanut, Kiad, and me, standing in a dimly lit hallway, breathing heavily, alive. And then came the emotional weight. I looked at Isla. She was exhausted, scarred by the ordeal, but alive. Peanut gurgled softly, safe. I had protected her, kept her alive, outsmarted people far more experienced, more ruthless than me. But now I had to confront the hardest part, saying goodbye or making a permanent choice. Isla reached for Peanut and I hesitated, the tiny hands curling into mine like anchors I couldn't let go of. I had spent weeks, maybe months with her. I had learned her quirks, laughed at her giggles, soothed her cries. I had become indispensable to her survival. And now, the question loomed, did I hand her over and step back into my normal life, or did I accept that my path had changed forever? Isla's eyes met mine, filled with gratitude, fear, and trust. She had given me everything, the life of her child, her most precious responsibility. And now it was my decision. I let out a deep breath, holding Peanut close one last time before passing her to Isla. I whispered, more to myself than anyone, stay safe, both of you. The weight of the choice pressed down, but I knew in my heart that I had done everything I could. I had survived, protected, and outsmarted. I had honored the trust Ayla had placed in me. And as we walked away from the remnants of the chaos, I realized something profound. Survival isn't just about outlasting danger. It's about protecting the fragile, the innocent, and sometimes learning that responsibility can change the trajectory of your life forever. The threat was gone, the network neutralized, but the emotional weight remained. A reminder that in the face of danger, courage, love, and trust could be the most powerful weapons of all. The world was quiet for the first time in what felt like forever. The chaos of the past weeks, the frantic airport, the shadows lurking in every hallway, the constant tension of being hunted had finally lifted, leaving only a calm that felt almost alien. I sat on the edge of a park bench, Peanut asleep against my chest, and let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like years. It was strange, reflecting on everything that had happened. How quickly life could shift from mundane routine to sheer, unrelenting chaos. One moment, I was a guy waiting at an airport, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, lost in thoughts about nothing particularly important. The next, I was the sole protector of a tiny life, navigating threats I couldn't have imagined, outsmarting people far more experienced and dangerous than I ever thought I could face. I looked down at Peanut, her tiny chest rising and falling in gentle rhythm, her little hand curling around mine. Somehow, despite all the madness, she had become a symbol of something more. Hope, responsibility, connection. She had made me realize how fragile life could be, and how profoundly someone else's trust could shape your own choices. Isla Mercer sat beside me, exhausted, but with a quiet strength in her eyes that told me she had survived her own battles. There was a calm understanding between us now, a bond forged in desperation, danger, and shared responsibility. She glanced at Peanut, then at me, and for a moment, no words were necessary. She started, hesitating. I can't ask you to do this forever, but I also can't not ask you to consider it. I tilted my head, waiting. She took a deep breath. Peanut, she's your responsibility now. Or at least we can figure it out together. You've proven yourself, Ethan. You've kept her alive, safe, and loved in a way that I could never have expected to leave her with anyone. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't a request, it was a recognition. A validation of everything I had done. Every choice I had made, every sleepless night and terrified moment. I looked at Peanut again, the tiny life that had become the center of my world. The truth hit me fully. I had changed. not just because of what I had faced, but because of who I had become in the process. Courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about acting despite the fear. Responsibility isn't about obligation. It's about love, protection, and connection. And human connection, messy, unexpected, sometimes terrifying, was what had gotten me through. We talked for hours, quietly, carefully, about options, about the future, about what was best for Peanut. There were moments of tension, of uncertainty, but always underlined with the same understanding. Her safety and well-being came first. And slowly, a plan emerged. Not perfect, not simple, but workable. We agreed that Peanut would stay with me, at least for now, while Isla worked to rebuild a life where she could safely return. We coordinated, prepared, and set boundaries that ensured the baby's protection while giving Isla some peace of mind. It wasn't a traditional family structure, not by any measure, but it was ours. And somehow, that made it feel right. The days that followed were quieter, calmer, but still tinged with the remnants of the ordeal we had endured. I learned more about Peanut every day. The subtle ways she responded to voices, the tiny habits she had developed, even how she seemed to sense danger before I could. And I learned more about myself. Patience I didn't know I had, courage I didn't know I could summon. A capacity for love and care that stretched far beyond what I had imagined. Occasionally, Isla would check in, guiding decisions, offering advice, sometimes just watching from a distance as I navigated the day-to-day responsibilities of caring for Peanut. Our bond was unconventional, forged in crisis, but it worked. It was real. It was necessary, and it was healing in its own way. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the city bathed in soft amber light, I sat with Peanut in my lap, rocking her gently. She gurgled and reached up, her tiny hand brushing against my cheek. I smiled, a warmth spreading through me I hadn't felt before. In that moment, the weight of everything, the danger, the fear, the sleepless nights, felt justified. Every struggle, every choice, every challenge had led to this. Isla joined us, sitting beside me, her hand resting lightly on Peanut's tiny back. We didn't need to speak. The quiet was enough. The world outside was still uncertain, still complicated, but in that small circle of trust and care, everything felt possible. And that, I realized, was the true gift of this experience. The chaos, the fear, the danger, they had stripped life down to its core. Connection, trust, courage, and love. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was real, and it was ours. As night fell, Peanut asleep in my arms, Isla at my side, I felt a strange sense of peace. The future was unknown, full of challenges we couldn't yet imagine, but we would face them together. And somehow, in the midst of all the fear and uncertainty, I knew one thing for certain. Life had changed. For Peanut, for Isla, and for me. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something beautiful.